Zara arrived at the new mansion in Enugu where her extended family had gathered for a grand reunion. The compound buzzed with laughter, music, and the smell of food, but as she walked through the gate alone, every eye turned toward her. Once she had entered such gatherings with her husband at her side, but now she came by herself, carrying nothing but a small wooden box and her pride. Though recently divorced, she moved with quiet dignity, her head lifted high, determined not to let anyone see the storm still raging inside her heart. The whispers started almost immediately. A cluster of relatives sat in a corner, speaking loudly enough for her to hear. They sneered that she had become useless without a man, that she was now a burden, and that her life had no direction. Each word stung, but she refused to flinch. Instead, she found a seat, placing her little box carefully on her lap, while forcing a polite smile. The taunting grew bolder. Ifeoma, her ex-husband's sister, stood up in front of everyone and asked in a mocking voice what Zara had managed to achieve since her marriage collapsed. The room erupted with laughter, and the sting of humiliation spread through her chest. She tightened her grip on the box, her smile trembling as tears threatened to fall. Obiageli, one of her cousins, pushed further, daring her to open the box. She scoffed that maybe Zara kept her poverty hidden inside it. The cruel comment sent a fresh wave of giggles through the hall. All eyes fixed on Zara, waiting for her to stumble, waiting for the embarrassment that would make her shrink into silence. Instead, she rose to her feet slowly. The room grew quiet. Her voice was calm but carried a weight that made even the boldest mockers hesitate. With steady hands, she unlatched the wooden box. Inside lay neatly arranged legal papers, stamped certificates, and thick bundles of property deeds. Rippled across the room as she explained in a measured tone how she had quietly built a logistics company during her difficult marriage. She revealed how the business had grown to employ more than 200 people, and among those employees were some of the same relatives who had just laughed at her. Faces turned pale, whispers shifted, and pride melted into shame. Without raising her voice, Zara closed the box, lifted it gracefully, and walked out of the house. This time, the whispers that followed her were no longer filled with scorn. They carried awe, respect, and disbelief. The whispering began the moment Zara stepped into the hall. A group of relatives huddled together, speaking in voices loud enough to reach her ears. Their words were sharp, like knives wrapped in laughter. They said she was nothing now, that without a husband she was worthless, that her life had no meaning anymore. Some even added that she was living only as a weight on others, a problem nobody wanted to carry. Each comment was thrown out carelessly, as though her pain was entertainment for them. She could hear every cruel sentence, but she kept her face calm, refusing to let them see her break. Inside, her chest burned, yet she sat tall, clutching the small wooden box on her lap as though it was her shield. She smiled faintly, a smile that did not reach her eyes, while their laughter grew louder. Every whisper carried a reminder of the battles she had faced, of the nights she had cried alone, of the strength it had taken to stand on her own again. The circle of gossipers leaned closer to each other, whispering but making sure their voices carried across the room. They mocked her for walking in without a ring, without a man beside her, without the image of success they thought mattered most. They painted her as a woman who had lost everything, someone whose story had ended. Some shook their heads in pity that was not real, pity that tasted like poison, while others smirked openly, enjoying her silence. Zara sat still, her hands firm on the box, her back straight, her eyes scanning the room as though she had not heard a word. But she had heard it all. She absorbed every insult, every sneer, and every false judgment. What they did not know was that she carried more than pain. She carried truth. She carried proof of everything they believed she could never have. The whispers spread from one corner to another until it seemed the entire hall had joined in, each voice adding another cruel label to her name. They thought they were breaking her spirit, yet all they were doing was setting the stage for what was to come. For in that box she held so tightly rested a storm they could not see, a storm that would turn every laugh into silence and every whisper into awe. Her ex-husband's sister, Ifeoma, stood up in the middle of the hall with a sly smile on her face. She raised her voice so that everyone could hear, asking Zara in a mocking tone what she had managed to achieve since the marriage ended. Her words cut through the noise of chatter and music, and suddenly the room fell silent for just a moment before laughter exploded. The sound echoed against the walls, cruel and heavy, as people clapped their hands, some even pointing at Zara as if she were a joke. Ifeoma leaned forward, her voice dripping with scorn, reminding everyone how Zara once depended on her brother, and now, without him, she was nothing. She asked if Zara had a job, if she had any money, if she had anything at all to show for her life. Her questions were not questions. They were daggers sharpened to wound. The laughter grew louder, spreading like fire, and soon even those who had stayed quiet joined in, eager to share in the humiliation. Zara sat still, her wooden box pressed firmly against her lap, her hands gripping it tightly. She felt the heat rise in her chest, but her face did not crumble. She forced a soft smile, though her eyes shimmered with unspoken pain. Every laugh felt like a slap, every word from Ifeoma like salt poured on a wound. Still she did not speak. She let the laughter echo, let the voices grow wild, while she breathed slowly, her silence louder than their noise. Ifeoma smirked, proud of herself, feeding on the energy in the room. She repeated her questions, this time louder, asking if Zara had achieved anything at all, or if she was simply wasting her days in misery. The crowd chuckled again, enjoying the show. It was not just a question anymore. It was a public stage built to crush Zara's pride. But what Ifeoma and the others did not see was the fire building behind Zara's calm expression. They thought they had won, that they had stripped her of her dignity. Yet every cruel laugh only prepared the ground for the moment that was coming. Beneath her quietness was a power they could not imagine, a truth so strong it would silence the entire hall in seconds. All she had to do was choose the right moment to speak. Zara forced a smile, though her lips trembled under the weight of the ridicule. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall in front of those who wanted to see her break. Instead, she clutched the small wooden box tighter against her chest, as if drawing strength from it. To everyone else, it looked like nothing more than an old, ordinary box, but to her it was a lifeline, the quiet proof of everything she had worked for, everything they believed she never had. Her heart pounded, and she could feel the sting of humiliation pressing in on all sides. The laughter, the whispers, the bold insults. They swirled around her like a storm. She wanted to shout back, to defend herself, but she knew her silence carried more weight than their noise. The box grew heavier in her grip, not because of its contents, but because of the secrets it held. Each certificate, each paper inside it told a story no one in that hall could guess. She sat still, her fingers tracing the carvings on the wooden lid, her knuckles white from holding it so tightly. Her forced smile was a mask, hiding the silent tears that threatened to slip. She swallowed hard, refusing to show weakness. Every cruel laugh burned, but with each sting, she reminded herself of why she had kept her success hidden. She remembered the long nights of struggle, the sacrifices she had made, the battles she had fought while everyone doubted her. The room saw only a woman cornered by shame, but inside her heart, something stronger was rising. The small box was more than wood and papers. It was her shield, her sword, her victory waiting to be revealed. She listened to their taunts, nodding faintly as though their words meant nothing, while in truth she was preparing for the moment when the silence would shift, when the tables would turn. Her smile widened just slightly, enough to confuse the ones watching closely. They thought she was pretending to be strong, but what they did not know was that her strength was real, hidden in plain sight. The box pressed against her hands like a heartbeat, reminding her that the time was near. The tears stayed locked behind her eyes, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She was ready. Her cousin Obiageli leaned back in her chair with a smirk, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. She pointed at the wooden box Zara held so tightly and dared her to open it. With a cruel laugh, she added that maybe it was filled with her poverty, that perhaps the only thing inside was proof of her failure. The words sliced through the air like a blade, and almost instantly, laughter filled the room again. People shook their heads, some covering their mouths as though shocked, but their eyes shone with amusement. To them, the taunt was entertainment, another way to tear Zara down in public. Obiageli crossed her arms, enjoying the attention she was getting. She kept her gaze locked on Zara, daring her to prove otherwise. Others leaned closer, their curiosity rising. What could be inside the box? They whispered to one another, creating stories of what it might contain. Debts, letters of rejection, maybe even nothing at all. The laughter grew, echoing off the walls, and every sound seemed designed to push Zara into breaking. Zara's fingers tightened around the box. She lowered her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, her calm face hiding the storm brewing within. Her heart beat faster, but she refused to give Obiageli or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She sat still, letting the laughter wash over her, letting the mocking words settle in the air. They thought she was cornered, but she knew she held the power none of them could imagine. Obiageli laughed again, louder this time, urging her to stop pretending and open it in front of everyone. The crowd cheered at the challenge, their eyes fixed on Zara as if waiting for a show. They expected humiliation, expecting her to hesitate, to fail, to crumble under their gaze. But Zara remained silent, her hands steady, her face unreadable. The room grew restless, the taunts continuing, the pressure mounting. Everyone wanted to see the contents of the wooden box, convinced it was nothing but a symbol of shame. Yet what they did not know was that inside lay a truth far greater than their mockery. A truth that would silence every laugh in an instant. All she had to do was decide when the moment was right to lift the lid. All eyes turned to Zara, the laughter fading into a tense hush. Everyone leaned forward, eager to witness her embarrassment, expecting her to stammer or retreat. The whispers circled around her like smoke, pressing her to open the wooden box and expose what they believed was nothing but shame. The air grew heavy with anticipation, the silence broken only by muffled giggles and the clinking of glasses. Zara's fingers rested gently on the box as she sat still for a moment, her eyes moving across the room. She looked at each mocking face, one after another, without lowering her gaze. Then slowly she rose to her feet. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor echoed louder than the laughter that had filled the hall just moments ago. Her movements were steady, graceful, and deliberate, as though she carried no weight of fear. A hush fell over the gathering. Even Obiageli, who had thrown the cruel challenge, shifted uneasily in her seat. Zara's posture was tall, her shoulders back, her chin lifted with quiet strength. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, firm, and steady, so steady it carried through the hall like a soft drumbeat. She did not shout, she did not argue. She simply allowed her words to flow with confidence, and that alone was enough to silence the restless crowd. She reminded them, without anger, that mockery had never built anyone's worth, and that silence should not be mistaken for weakness. Her tone was not defensive, but filled with certainty, the kind that could not be shaken by laughter or gossip. Each word drew them in, pulling their attention away from the whispers, and onto the woman standing before them with her wooden box. The tension grew stronger with each passing second. The relatives who had once giggled nervously now leaned forward, curiosity replacing ridicule. They had expected tears and excuses, but instead, they were confronted with poise and strength. The longer she stood, the more the power in the room shifted, though few realized it yet. Her hand brushed against the lid of the box, but she did not open it right away. She let the suspense build, let the silence stretch. The room that had once been filled with mocking laughter now held only quiet anticipation. Every heart beat faster, waiting, wondering, and bracing for what she was about to reveal. She placed the wooden box on the table in front of her and gently lifted the lid. The hall fell into complete silence as the contents came into view. Neatly arranged inside were stacks of legal papers, crisp certificates, and thick folders with property deeds bearing her name. The mocking smiles froze, eyes widened, and the sound of laughter died in their throats. What they had expected to be an empty box of shame was instead a treasure chest of proof, a collection of success that none of them had imagined. Zara reached inside and pulled out the first set of documents, holding them up so everyone could see. They were stamped papers confirming her ownership of large shares in a thriving business. Murmurs spread through the room, disbelief written across every face. She set them down carefully and lifted another, revealing property titles registered under her name. Gasps echoed, louder this time, as people craned their necks to catch a glimpse. Each paper she revealed was like a stone dropped into water, sending waves through the once proud crowd. Her voice was steady as she explained what the documents meant, her calmness carrying more power than any raised tone. She spoke simply, without boasting, but with the confidence of someone who had built her life with her own strength. She unfolded share certificates showing her investments, proof that she was not only independent but thriving. The very box they had mocked now stood as evidence of everything they had denied her. Relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier taunts replaced by silence. Some covered their mouths in shock, others whispered to each other, trying to piece together how she had managed it all in secret. The same people who had called her a burden now stared at her with wide eyes, realizing that the woman they thought had nothing actually had more than all of them combined. Zara closed the box softly, her hands steady, her face calm. She did not need to argue, did not need to throw back insults. The truth inside that box had already spoken louder than any words could. What was once a symbol of mockery had become the crown of her quiet victory, and the silence in the room proved she had won. She looked around the hall, her voice calm but strong as she began to speak. She explained that while everyone believed she had been sitting idle during her troubled marriage, she had been working quietly, building something no one knew about. She told them how she started with almost nothing, saving every little she could while enduring insults and struggles at home. Step by step, she invested her time, her ideas, and her energy into creating a logistics company that began with just one small truck and a dream. The relatives leaned forward, their eyes fixed on her, the disbelief growing stronger with every word. She revealed how she had hidden her progress, choosing not to share her achievements with anyone, not even with her ex-husband, because she knew her success would never be celebrated in that marriage. Instead, she had endured the storms in silence, working late nights, making deals, and pushing through barriers that many thought she could never break. She spoke of the sacrifices she made, of the sleepless nights when she had to balance survival with growth. She told them how she trained herself, studied business on her own, and never stopped dreaming even when people mocked her. The papers inside the wooden box were not just documents. They were proof of battles fought in silence, victories achieved without applause, and strength built out of pain. The more she explained, the more the hall changed. The same people who had laughed at her minutes earlier now sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide, their mouths shut. She told them her company had grown far beyond what anyone would imagine, that it was not just surviving but thriving, with branches in multiple cities. Every detail she shared was like a wave washing away the mockery that had filled the room. Her voice never trembled, not once. She spoke with the quiet pride of someone who knew her worth and no longer needed validation. The shocking truth hung in the air, undeniable and powerful. She had risen from the ashes of a broken marriage and built an empire in secret. The very woman they called useless had become the pillar of strength and success none of them could match. Gasps filled the hall as Zara continued speaking, and the weight of her words pressed on everyone like thunder. She revealed that her company was not small at all, but a thriving business that now employed more than 200 people. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from those who had just mocked her. Faces that had been lit with laughter only moments ago now turned pale, their eyes darting nervously around the room. She looked directly at the cousins and uncles who had whispered the loudest, her voice steady as she told them that some of those 200 workers were sitting right there in the hall. A murmur spread through the gathering as heads turned, eyes landing on relatives who avoided her gaze, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The revelation hit harder than any slap could. The very people who had laughed at her pain were on her company's payroll, dependent on her success for their daily bread. The room erupted with uneasy whispers. Some gasped again, some stared in open shock, and others bowed their heads in shame. Obiageli, who had mocked her most cruelly, sat frozen, her smirk completely gone. Ifeoma, who had shouted her humiliation, clenched her fists and looked away, unable to meet Zara's eyes. Every taunt they had thrown at her now echoed back like a bitter reminder of their own blindness. Zara's calmness only made the truth more powerful. She did not raise her voice, did not mock them in return. She simply let the facts speak, and the facts were undeniable. 200 men and women depended on her for their salaries. 200 families were fed because of her strength and determination. She was not a burden as they claimed. She was a builder, a provider, a leader who had risen far above the limitations they placed on her. The tables had turned completely. The laughter had died, replaced with awe and respect, though many were too proud to admit it aloud. Zara stood taller than ever, her presence commanding the room. The woman they once thought was broken had proven herself greater than all their judgments combined, and the whispers that followed now carried nothing but disbelief and admiration. Zara closed the wooden box softly, the sound echoing like the final note of a song that had silenced the entire hall. She did not wait for applause, nor did she pause for anyone's approval. With calm steps, she lifted the box into her arms and walked toward the door. Her head was high, her back straight, her every movement filled with quiet strength. No one dared laugh anymore. The same voices that had mocked her now lowered into hushed tones, but this time the whispers carried awe, respect, and even a touch of fear. As she moved past the tables, the relatives who once ridiculed her shifted in their seats, unable to meet her eyes. Some nodded faintly, as though hoping to soften the sting of their earlier cruelty. Others sat in silence, ashamed of the words they had thrown so easily. The power in the room had shifted completely. Zara no longer stood as the target of scorn, but as the woman who had proved them all wrong. The air felt different as she crossed the threshold. Outside, the evening breeze touched her face, cool and refreshing, like a gentle reward for her endurance. She breathed deeply, feeling lighter than she had in years. Behind her, the whispers continued, but they no longer spoke of failure or shame. They spoke of her strength, her empire, her unbelievable courage. What had begun as a night of humiliation had turned into a moment of triumph, a story they would tell again and again, not with laughter, but with admiration. Each step she took away from that hall was a declaration. She was no longer the woman they thought they could mock. She was no longer the one defined by a failed marriage. She was a leader, a builder, a conqueror of storms, and nothing could take that away. For Zara, this was more than victory, it was freedom. And as she disappeared into the night, carrying her wooden box of triumph, she left behind a room full of people who would never see her the same way again. Bustias. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.